And welcome to another edition of Two Steps Ahead podcast, encouraging you to take your passion, make it happen, let yourself be great. I'm Son Edom, and hey, do you remember growing up and the lessons that we were taught? Lessons, especially when it came to dealing with people we don't know, maybe strangers. Perhaps you might need a little refresher on how we were taught to deal with people that we did not know.
Okay, now, today we're going to talk about something else that's really important. Today, we're going to talk about strangers. Like, let's say you're at home and a stranger knocks on the door. You should never answer the door, never, because we never talk to strangers. Okay, why don't we all say that together? We never talk to strangers. Right, okay, let's say...
How about kids? Can we talk to kids?
Yeah, it's okay. You can talk to kids. That's all right.
What about dogs?
Huh?
Can we talk to dogs?
Yeah, you can talk to dogs. That's okay. But what you can't do, what you must never, ever, 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 ever do is... never talk to strangers.
Yeah, never talk to strangers, right? Stranger danger. People ask us to go with them somewhere. We were to say no. Never take candy from strangers. Don't get in cars with strangers. But of course, now throughout the years, a lot has changed, especially as adults. We now get in cars with strangers. In fact, we call them up and ask them for a ride. Or we take food from strangers. We call them up and ask them to deliver us the food that we request, or maybe even groceries. So there's a lot that has changed since when we grew up. And what about now inviting people in to our homes via computers, Zoom meetings, social media, live broadcasts? We see it all the time. So the whole idea of keeping strangers at bay has turned around into let's invite them into our world, let them know who we are. And California has decided that they want to put a bill in place that would basically allow strangers to come in and take your child. What do I mean by that? Well, there's a bill, California Bill AB 495, that some are calling a dangerous bill that puts every child at risk. Now, the legislation would allow any adult to claim that they are a child's caregiver or a mentor, a coach, doesn't matter. Anybody that knows who the kid is could claim to be somebody, even if you're a non-relative, and simply fill out and sign a caregiver's authorization affidavit. No parental consent is required, no parent notification, no photo ID, no court review, no background checks, nothing is required. In fact, I've got the authorization right here. And all you do is you put the name of the minor. If you know their birth date, it does say the name of the person giving authorization, but that's usually like the person that's submitting the authorization. Put your home address. You could say whether you're a relative or non-relative, it doesn't matter. There's a box that says, I have advised the parents, or I'm unable to contact the parents. So you could just I'm unable to collect, or check off, I'm unable to connect with the parents. Date of birth, California driver's license. Now it says, warning to caregiver. Okay, do not sign this form if any of the statements above are incorrect. You'll be committing a crime punishable by fine, imprisonment, or both. However, the very next thing says, a parent's signature or a seal or signature from the court is not required. Go to the next page, and it has a bunch of stuff that I guess is legalese. And again, a parent's signature or seal or signature of the court is not required. Then at the bottom, a parent's signature or seal or signature of the court is not required. So again, there's multiple places on here where a parent's consent isn't required. You can just check the box. It says, I'm a relative. I have not been able or been unable to contact the parents. put down some information, whether it's true or not. I mean, I guess you could be charged with perjury if they even care about that stuff. But it's all right here on the affidavit. And then you can walk into any school, ask for the kid, and the school hands over the kid, and off they go. And then when the parents show up asking, where's my kid, the school is under no obligation, nor are they under any liability to tell you where your kid is. So basically, there are zero safeguards. And like I said, one of the check box on the forms reads, quote, I am unable to contact the parents, or other persons having legal custody of the minor at this time to notify them of my intended authorization. So right there, that single sentence could be used to sidestep a parent's rights entirety. It also adds the term to the affidavit called non-relative or extended family member. That's not on there. Also, again, not a family member. Could be unrelated. People that could qualify that is a non-family member. Could be a neighbor, maybe a teacher, maybe a family friend, perhaps a coach. Anybody that really knows the child. And we'll get into more specifics about some of those scenarios, but there's a pastor, Jack Hibbs, out of Southern California, that is really outspoken about this. In fact, he told his congregation, if this bill passes, you should probably consider, and you have young kids, you should probably consider leaving California. That's how serious he has taken this bill to be. Here is Jack Hibbs.
That should their parent or parents be taken by ICE, that the child then can be put into the custody of or into the possession of anyone. Listen, anyone, without a background check, without any required proof of ID, no license, no address, nothing's required. It is suggested that they provide ID, but not required. They can fill out an affidavit that they can print on their computer at home. Anyone can do this. And they can check a box that says, I have tried to reach the parents. You check the box. And then you sign it. You walk to the school and you say, I am requesting Susie Jones. I'm requesting Susie Jones. The school cannot deny the affidavit request of John Doe. John Doe takes possession of the child. He goes away. The school, when mom and dad show up to the school to pick up the child, the school is under no obligation to tell even the parents the name of the individual that filled out the affidavit.
So there, Pastor Jack Hibbs talking about what the bill is about. Now, according to authors of the bill, it was designed to be an anti-ICE preventative move. For example, if a parent gets detained by ICE and perhaps deported, they could have this affidavit filled out, or someone could fill out the affidavit and take responsibility of the kid. Now, the question I would ask is, I don't know about you, but I don't know of any parent, especially if it's a younger child, who is going to be detained by anybody that is going to give up their rights as a parent to their kid. If you're going to be deported, chances are you're going to want to take that kid with you when you're being deported. You're not going to leave them behind unless maybe there was a relative, but you're just going to leave them behind with any stranger. At least I wouldn't think. But again, that was the intent. But then it goes so far to have no safeguards that anybody at any time could pick up any child under the caregiver. And under the old, apparently there was an old law that required it to be a relative. Now this new law allows it to be a non-relative. And so anybody, no ID, no court review, no background check, no notification, nothing can pick up your kid. Here is Jack Hibbs with more.
This individual has come to the school with this affidavit, which is directly connected to the Protection of Family Act, which is this, and the author said so. You can watch her online. She said it is to protect children from ICE and from Trump's immigration issues that are going on in California, so the child can be taken away to safety to a person who has no identification needing to be proven, no background check. It could be anybody, even non-related individual. So think about that. God forbid, I could be a bad guy, Raj, go to your kid's school and say, here's the affidavit from the state of California. I'm here to provide protection for this child. I'm asking the child to come with me now. They cannot withhold the child from going into this man's custody. And then you go to pick up your kid that day at school and they're not there anymore.
I know a lot of people with the liberal mindset would think this is okay. There's nothing wrong with it. But tell me exactly what could go right about this. Let's look at all the scenarios, for example. Not all the scenarios, but let's look at some of the scenarios that could go wrong. First of all, let's say that you're a parent of a religious nature and you go to church and all of a sudden somebody hears your child say something at school that they disagree with. Or perhaps of a political nature, there's a conversation at home and the child repeats something that the parent believes in politically. In this case, this whole bill is is an anti-Trump bill, so maybe they find out that the parents are Trump supporters. Anybody can walk in and just take this kid away. Take him away from the parents. And who knows, there's nothing in the affidavit, nothing in any of this that says you have to return the kid. That's the other part. There's nothing in here that gives any type of indication on the affidavit or any of the bill summaries that I have seen that says you have to return the kid. Now, maybe you can, and maybe there is, and maybe there's an amendment, whatever. But that's just what I've seen so far. But let's take it a little bit deeper. Okay, let's say it's middle school. Okay, and let's say young boy, young girl, they're dating. And let's say the young girl gets pregnant. And let's say that the young girl and her family decide that they're going to keep the baby, but the young boy, who is now the father, and his family, they don't want the kid. So what's to keep the father of the boy, who's the father of the baby, if you can track that, okay, from picking up the girl at school under false pretenses, taking her to an abortion clinic in California, where there's no parental consent necessary. In fact, you can come from out of state because it's a sanctuary city for abortion. And so you take this girl in under false pretenses. You take her out of school, you take her to the abortion clinic, and you coerce her into giving up the child. Is that okay? My body, my choice. The girl decided that she wanted to keep it, but because the baby daddy's family didn't want his son to be responsible for a child at that age, decided under false pretenses, fill out an affidavit, takes the girl under false pretenses and does away with it. Or what about any number of human trafficking, sex trafficking? What about any number of people that are in the LGBT community? There was a couple of articles that I've seen and I've read from people that were transitioning from male to female and decided that they didn't want to do it anymore and decided to detransition, which of course you go from hero to goat when you do that. But what's to keep somebody whose parents decide that, or some kid that wants to detransition gets taken by whomever, fill out the affidavit, pick up the kid, and take him to get treatment or gender reassignment surgery or whatever. Because we all know California, they don't really look at parental consent as anything. Again, this is another bill to rip the rights of parents. And so Jack Hibbs says that if you see this bill pass, you should probably take off and leave California. Now, we all know California is a place where they have dangerous laws to begin with. I mean, you think back to, was it 2017? Well, there was one bill in 2017 that Scott Wiener is the state politician who's probably far more dangerous than even Gavin Newsom. Just wait till he becomes governor. But in 2017, he authored a bill that made the change, the penalty from a felony to a misdemeanor. And the crime is if you knowingly exposed a partner to HIV, you would no longer be committing a felony, it would just be a misdemeanor. Instead of years in prison, maybe up to 6 months in jail, which we all know in California, you don't serve any time. Okay. So, and in fact, there was a clause in there that said if you expose your partner with the intent of transmitting the virus, then it lowers that offense to a misdemeanor. And Governor Jerry Brown at the time signed it. And people were okay with that. In 2023, there was a bill that got killed in committee by the Safety Committee of California that would have advanced legislation that would have increased penalties for child trafficking, making it a serious felony. But because of the 3 strikes laws and how this would affect maybe some disenchanted people or whatever they call them now these days, they squashed it in committee. But then there was a huge blowback on this, and so they decided to renegotiate, and some watered down portion of the bill became law. And so you're sitting here and you're just looking at what's going on in the state of California. It's like, you got to be kidding me. Why is it that there is such an assault on kids? I mean, when you think about it, you look at this affidavit and it is very nondescript. Like I said, I just printed it off on my printer. And it looks like there's some safeguards that might be on here, but again, nothing is binding. You could put true information on here, but mislead. And again, looking through this, even briefly kind of perusing it right now, I don't see anything in here that means that you have to return the child without the requirement of a guardianship or other custody order. I mean, I was at school the other day. And school obviously started up for everybody now. And so I was at a school, and I was actually working security at a school. And I was basically in the front office, keeping an eye on the cameras and stuff. And there were people coming in toward the end of the day looking to pick up a child. One was a nanny, but she wasn't on the list to give the kid to. So the school had to contact the parent, and the parent gave permission. And then the parent had to send in an email verifying that her permission was legit for the child to go with a nanny. A grandfather showed up to take another kid. Wasn't on the pickup list. Had to call the parent and approve that the grandparent, and then they had to and it's a private school, so they kind of knew each other. Everybody kind of knows each other once you've been there for a couple of years. So they kind of knew who he was. But again, they wouldn't just release the child, the student, to even the grandfather without verification from the parent because he was not on the pickup list. But here in this case, apparently, we're just giving kids to anybody who has an affidavit, and who knows what happens to them, who knows when they're coming back, and the parent might not ever see the kid again. But that's okay in California because they'd rather put kids at risk than go along with something that Donald Trump, who is the president, would have. Now let's take a look at something just real quick, okay? According to the Gallup poll, 9.3% of U.S. adults identify as LGBT, okay? That's up about 2% from 2023 and up from 5% in 2020. And they say that part of it is because there's greater acceptance, maybe more visibility. I'm sure the influence of TikTok and social media has a huge impact on that. But apparently, because of all this exposure, now we're up to about 10%, 9%, really 9% of the U.S. adult population identifies as LGBT. It doesn't really list anything for kids, but let's just say 9% of kids, and we'll just keep it equal. Well, according to more statistics, the LGBTQ transitioning business, whether it be surgeries, whether it be hormone therapy, whether it be any other care, you're looking at a $2 billion to $5 billion a year industry. Gender affirming surgeries are about $4 billion, and it looks to move to about $11 billion in the next 5 years. Hormone therapy is about $1.5 billion a year, and that's going to go up to about $2.5 billion in about 8 years. So you're looking at a significant amount of money to the billions. And that's what people see. Now, I'm not saying this correlates with this, the affidavit and the kids, but you could see where people would take kids if they were in this spectrum of transgender ideology, and why not take them to the clinic under the ruse of being a guardian? Or you look at surgeries, generating $4 billion, hormone therapies, $1.7 billion, and then you take a look at the longevity of how these things go. Because you have therapies that last for years, that money's going to keep rolling in. What about the abortion industry? $4.7 billion a year. And then support networks up to about $10 million, depending upon the industry. Now, again, they say that all of it isn't necessarily for abortion-related issues. It could be some other things, like Planned Parenthood does have some other services that they provide, but we all know Planned Parenthood, their main thing is aborting kids. Okay, let's take it out of something, or let's take it into something a little bit more acceptable. Toys. According to reports, U.S. retail toy sales amount to about $28 billion last year, which is pretty much holding steady. So you are looking at a pawn, a child, in this world that, one, if it makes it to birth, two, could be now, apparently, according to California law, could be taken by anybody. And again, you can't say it's not going to happen, because we all know full well that it is going to happen. You make it to your birthday, into the hospital, if you survive transgender ideology, and if you survive all the other stuff that goes on in this world, now you're being inundated by toys. And so you're always being targeted as a child in one thing or another. And there's nothing we can do about it, because some places, they just don't care. Take a look at social media. There are some places that have instituted laws to keep young people, especially 13 and under, off of social media, or having strict age restrictions to keep kids off of social media. Florida, for example, passed one in 2024. Louisiana, a couple of years ago. In fact, I think the law just went into effect in 2025 here now. But for Louisiana, it requires all minors to obtain parental consent before using interactive computer services. Down in Florida, you have age verification requirements for technology. Again, parental consent, but how many times do parents just say, okay, here you go? I mean, we give iPads to kids when they're 2 years old to occupy their time. Texas passed a bill that went into effect in 2024, requires social media companies to prevent minors from stumbling onto inappropriate or harmful content. And then part of that bill also requires social media companies to limit services to minors who do not obtain parental consent. And there are other places in the world that have age verification. There's other places in the United States that denied age verification. I know France and Germany passed age verification laws. But again, Canada and Denmark and the European Union are considering it. But again, children become a pawn in the world we live in. I mean, look at divorces. If there's a divorce that involves children, no one thinks what's best for the child. They become a pawn in this fight between mom and dad as they get divorced. And it's pretty sad that we have that. And one of the reasons why we probably are going down this road is because we lack discipline. We lack discipline in the world. We lack discipline. I mean, crimes. Look what we just saw from California. If your intent is to transmit HIV to somebody, that's no longer a felon. That's just a misdemeanor. Well, if you child traffic, you engage in child trafficking, nah, we're not interested in that. Oh, wait, the whole world is, okay, we better change our minds because now we're pressured into changing it, but we'll water it down. What's going on now with ICE? People entering the country illegally. We've talked about that before on the podcast. You can go back and listen to the old shows about that. But again, people supporting illegal criminal elements. Jessica Tarlov on Fox News, which I don't really watch, but this hit social media like a firestorm. Apparently, there was a video of ICE agents taking down a person, and she went out and defended the person, said it was horrible that they did this, and basically condemned ICE agents. But then when it was turned out that the information was that this was a violent assault criminal that was assaulting people, possibly even kids, then she had to delete it. And then her excuse was, I didn't know. Because that's the ideology. Jump, knee-jerk reaction, and then, oh, I'm wrong. Or the dude that went down to, the MS-13 guy that went back to El Salvador, and everybody thinks, the Maryland guy, and everyone thinks he's the greatest guy in the world. Why do we defend these people? And you can even take it so far as to George Floyd and others that have had police encounters. But it's because we don't discipline. Discipline has become the thing of the past. You can't discipline your child. We don't discipline them in school. In fact, I've been in schools where I've seen a kid dump over a desk because they were pissed off at their teacher. And then the special ed student or the special ed teacher comes down, or the behavioral interventionist or whoever it is that does that. And he negotiated that if he picks up his desk and cleans it up, he would get a reward. What is that all about? But that's the world we live in. The other sad thing, and this is really sad, weak, and pathetic, and probably explains where we are today with all this other stuff. Okay, so James Dobson passed away. People, if you don't know who James Dobson is, he was a Christian pastor, started to focus on the family. He was an author and became a conservative advocate for conservatism. And when he passed away, I guess first I should tell you that he wrote 2 books. One was Dare to Discipline, and one was The Strong-Willed Child, and it had to deal with, obviously, disciplining. Now, there are people on TikTok, and I don't know why this hit my algorithm, because again, I don't really go on there too much. There's a few things that I try to look for, like, for example, now Burning Man is in full force, or at least it's going to start up on the Playa of Nevada, and that interests me from the standpoint of I don't know why anybody wants to go there. I mean, like, they just had sandstorms come through there, and everything is coated in thick layer of sand. Why? I don't get it. It's fascinating to me that people want to live in those conditions voluntarily. But let's continue. So there's certain things I like to watch. Maybe you're all familiar with that Mars hippopotamus or whatever it is that's at the Wichita Wildlife Preserve. Another thing. So there are some things that are of interest, plus photography, how-to stuff, and whatever. But for whatever reason, I start getting these people dancing, celebrating the fact that Dr. James Dobson passed away, and saying how evil he was because he wrote these books. And apparently the parents of these people, and there was a numerous amount of videos that I saw, apparently the parents tried to implement these things. Well, it explains, if you're celebrating why James Dobson is dead and you blame him for your troubled youth, then you probably were a strong-willed child and probably needed discipline. But you look at these people and you realize there's something wrong with them, because they are literally dancing and celebrating the fact that he died. And of course, they all have different colored hair, nose rings, stuff like that. Not inherently bad, but typical. Let's just be stereotypical. So, they were rebellious and disobedient as kids. They were defiant, much like what we've seen throughout the years with all the news headlines of the George Floyds and others. But what if we had more discipline in this society? I mean, people hate authority, such as the police, such as government, especially when it's a conservative government. We've seen riots. We've seen protests. We've seen defund the police. We've seen doxing of ICE agents. We've seen other attacks on authority. Now, when you take a look at the strong-willed child, for example, there was an analogy that Dobson drew between the defiance of a family pet and a small child. And I guess the conclusion was, just as surely as a dog will occasionally challenge the authority of his leader, the owner, so will a little child, only more so. And it goes on to say that if authority is portrayed correctly to a child, the child will understand how to interact with other authority figures. And apparently this is what caused a bunch of people to have terrible childhoods, because they were, I guess, disciplined by their parents and they hated it, and therefore James Dobson is evil. But if we were to portray correctly to a child authority, then perhaps we wouldn't have the disrespect that we have in schools right now. Perhaps we wouldn't have the disrespect to police. Now, teachers, police officers, government officials, parents, every one of us has something wrong with us. We do wrong. We're not perfect. But on a whole, if we had respect for authority, whatever that might be, a boss, then we would probably have a better society all around. Went on to say, by learning to yield to the loving authority of his parents, a child learns to submit to other forms of authority which will confront him later in life, his teachers, school, principal, police, neighbors, and employers. So now that's back to school time, we find a teacher shortage. Again, most teachers leaving the profession because of kids' bad behavior. Sure, there's other things, but it's bad behavior. No one wants to deal with these bratty kids who lack discipline. They lack respect for teachers. And there are teachers who lack respect for administration and lack of authority themselves. They lack respect for authority. A lot of teachers. Just go to your favorite video hosting website and you'll see teachers out there railing against all kinds of authority. There's administrators who don't respect government authority, or maybe even people under them. So there's all kinds of disrespect that goes on in this world. But if we had a proper, or if these people were more disciplined properly, we might not be in the state we are. But do you ever notice, for those of you that might read the Bible, go to church and do all that, that Jesus had a special connection with children? It shows up repeatedly in the Gospels. And it's meaningful if you haven't thought about it. And again, maybe this is why we see an assault on kids from all angles, whether they're a pawn in a divorce, whether they're a pawn in schools, ideology, whether they're a pawn in the political realm, whether they're a money-making thing through LGBT, abortion, toys, whatever, McDonald's, food, obesity. There was a video that I saw. Again, I don't know if these are always true, but I like to just share them anyways because there's some little bit of truth to it. But apparently this gal was showing off her EBT haul from wherever she got all this food from. And it was all this crap food like donuts and chips and candy and soda. And this girl was probably morbidly obese as I would imagine, a teenager, but it was hard to tell. Okay. So again, it's just a pawn. Kids are just a pawn, a way to make money or to get an advantage or to whatever it is. But nobody really looks anymore as the child and says, this is the most important thing that we need to work on. Even the most innocent of kids in school that do good get pushed by the wayside. I mean, look at Virginia. A couple years ago when they were withholding AP honors from students because they did not want the school districts, Loudoun County, for example, did not want the dumb kids, basically, to feel bad because these other students were striving. How many times have we adjusted grades to make the dumb kids or the kids that don't care not feel so bad? Everybody gets a trophy mentality, right? We take away success. We take away ambition. We take away all that because we don't want the people at the bottom end of the success spectrum to feel bad. But if we looked at kids through the eyes of Jesus, then perhaps we might see them a little different. I mean, you could just pick up in Matthew. I guess the most common verse is, Matthew 19, I think it is. Let the little children come unto me, forbid them not, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Right there, declaring God's kingdom, especially for those who are small, overlooked, and vulnerable. And that's exactly what kids are. They're overlooked, They're vulnerable. They're taken advantage of. And we do that as a society, as a people. But if we looked at them through the eyes of God, we'd see them differently. What about Matthew 18, when children reflect humility and dependence? And that's why Jesus always says you have to have the faith of a child, because a child will just accept anything as is. They don't question it. They're easy to forgive. They usually run to you and accept you. And we see all those cute videos of kids reaching out to strangers, maybe on the subway or whatever, touching them, interacting with them, those cute videos. Obviously, the parents are right there. But that's what a child is. Matthew 18, Jesus says we must become like children to enter the kingdom of heaven. Children rely on others completely. It is a complete picture of dependence and trust that God desires in us. What about purity and sincerity? Unlike adults, who are often weighed down with pride, ambition, and hypocrisy, children are more open-hearted and genuine. And Jesus valued this simplicity of spirit. What about the vulnerable and powerless that is represented in children? In the culture of Jesus' time, children had little status, much like today. Although a lot of times today, the kids are the one that rules the roost, and they're spoiled, and they get anything they want, lacking discipline. Jesus showed that God's love extends to the least in society, not just to the powerful or the religious elite. Children are quick to trust, eager to learn, willing to believe. Jesus pointed to these qualities as a posture every believer should have toward God. And children symbolize new life and hope. Jesus often spoke of being born again. Children represent the fresh start, the innocence, the growth, and the promise of the future God is building. So that's how the Bible looks at children. What if we looked at children through the eyes of God? We might have a different perspective. We might be more protective. We might want what's best for them, not what's best for us. We might put them first. Wasn't it Dionne Warwick? The children are our future. Treat them well. Was that not the case? But see, we've gotten to a society where it's me first, the worship of self. We've gotten to a society where people are turning from logic, reason, common sense, and they're just accepting anything and everything. In fact, there was a video that someone posted that said the state of Florida banned the Diary of Anne Frank. And all these people went on there and trashed the state of Florida. If you look it up, there was a school district that had pulled it off the shelf because they wanted to review the content to make sure that it was age appropriate, because apparently it was in elementary school. And if you read the Diary of Anne Frank, there could be some things in there that you may not want in elementary school, but maybe middle school. But it was just a blanket statement, and people just buy into it, buy into things that don't even make sense. And again, I got to repeat this because a couple years ago, Georgia passed voter ID laws, okay? And then, of course, Texas being a conservative state. Well, the Rangers and the Braves, they were going to play in the World Series. I posted something on social media and said, and this was the year that Major League Baseball also pulled the All-Star game from Atlanta and put it into Colorado in protest of the voter ID laws. I believe it was this past year, 2025, that the All-Star game was back in Atlanta. I didn't see the game, but I'm thinking that's correct. But anyways, so back then they pulled it out of Atlanta because of the voter ID laws, a conservative state, and put it into Colorado, a more liberal state. Texas, the Rangers, and the Braves met in the World Series. I posted that Major League Baseball was going to move the World Series to New York based on what has been going on politically in the state those years. After all, baseball was just pulled the All-Star game from Georgia because of their voter ID laws. So this was completely plausible. I said they're moving it to New York. When the Rangers are the home team, it's going to be played at Yankee Stadium. When the Braves are the home team, it's going to be played at Shea Stadium, Citi Field, whatever it's called these days. And people bought into it. And it wasn't until a series of responses, oh, that's horrible, and this and that and whatever, did someone look it up and say, hey, this isn't even true. I Googled it, and there's no mention of it. Exactly. I completely made it up. And that is basically what social media has become. A place to just put whatever you want. People don't verify it. And what happens? You get false information. So you take a look at these people dancing around at the death of James Dobson, which is ridiculous. But you look back at possibly what they went through, and it's like they were probably the strong-willed child. They were probably defiant. They were probably the ones that were getting in trouble all the time, didn't get their way. And back then, parents weren't pushovers like they are today that we see. And so the child then blamed anybody else but themselves. And think about it. The people celebrating the fact that James Dobson, who promoted proper discipline, which is one of the things that I think people really missed out on. I think it was the fact that you had to have, what he said, loving and right discipline. By learning to yield to the loving authority of his parents, a child learns to submit to other forms. And it goes on. If we had more parents disciplining kids the right way, then we probably wouldn't have issues that we have today. If you think it was just an old school thought, Alistair Begg, somebody that I played many times on the program, talks about just the importance of discipline.
Well, discipline is important because God says it's important. I mean, again, this is where the scriptures are so crucial. We start from the conviction that God has spoken in his word, that he has spoken unerringly in his word, that God knows everything, that God knows what is best, that God wants what is best for his children, that he doesn't cause his children needless tears. Are we going to trust the Bible? Spare the rod, spoil the child. If you want to breed a monster, then continually let it go its own way. Discipline is there for our good. And unless a parent believes that, then it'll never happen.
See, discipline is there for our own good. And unless a parent thinks that, it's not going to happen. People would rather breed monsters, as he said, than to incorporate discipline. Now, obviously, over the years, discipline has gotten out of control because some people would use that as abuse, just beat the kid for whatever reason. In fact, I was listening to a interview with Sammy Hagar of Sammy Hagar Van Halen, and his dad was an alcoholic, pretty bad, to the point where he couldn't hold down a job, and they were homeless a lot. But he would beat his wife. Sammy Hagar's dad would beat his wife. Now, he never beat Sammy Hagar and the kids, but domestic dispute, right? Domestic violence is what it came down to because he was a drunk. And yes, we've heard of parents beating their kids for no reason. We've seen it. If you saw the movie Goodfellas, one of the opening scenes, the kid is running around with the mob, doesn't go to school. School calls the parents, and the kid gets a beating. So yes, discipline has been taken out of context over the years, but discipline is necessary. Look at the military. People go into the military undisciplined, they come out disciplined, and it's done in a loving and correct way. Now, it might not seem loving at the time, but you're breaking down the old and building up the new, and it works. And if it's done correctly, then the child is going to grow up to learn respect. And it's the kids who become the people now dancing on social media, praising the fact that somebody who wrote a couple books back in the 80s, influential in the 70s and 80s, is dead. They are the ones that probably needed the discipline the most and yet never learned from it because obviously they don't respect anything. But imagine if we had it. If it was done correctly. And it doesn't even have to be, I know, and they're talking about spanking. He was Dobson was a big thing on spanking, which, is spoil the rod. Spare the rod, spoil the child was what Alistair Begg was saying. And yes, there's probably a time and place for that. And if you do your research and you understand it, and you understand the principles of it, it is a very finite process. It's not just beat the kid and that's it. It's a very finite process with specific instructions, okay? But here's the thing. Let's just say you take the spanking out of it. What do we have? Oh, you have a timeout. What does that mean? You have a timeout. I'm going to count to 5. And then the parent counts to 5 like 6, 7 times, counting to 30, 35, 40 before the kid complies. They make all these false things. I'm going to take that away from you. And yet they don't. See, there's a lot of false discipline, and kids pick up on that. I mean, again, we picked up on the fact that kids can learn things. They soak things up. They're sponges. And so they realize that the parent is making a veiled threat, and it's not even going to follow through with it. So therefore, I'm going to keep doing what I want to do. We've seen how many kids, young adults out in the world, commit crime. Nothing happens to them. In fact, California and Governor Gavin Newsom, California passed a bill, I think it's Bill 36 or whatever it's called, where it's supposed to increase, because remember, they made it that if you stole something under $950, it was just a misdemeanor, no big deal. And so they changed that. And so now they're supposed to enforce lower level crimes and misdemeanors because it got so rampant out there. So rampant to the point that places like Walgreens and CVS and those types of places left. And other places have left because crime is so rampant. And we've seen them on video all over the place of the crime of these mobs of young kids doing things, and nothing really ever happens to them. So the Californians, the people, voted for it, but yet now Gavin Newsom says that they can't fund it because they don't have the money. But then he turns around, now he's funding a redistricting plan, a gerrymandering plan. So again, even the people that do crime, nothing. They get out on bail. How many times have we seen somebody commit a crime? They're out on not even bail, but let's just call it they're out on bail, and they turn around and commit more crimes. They've been deported, they come back, and they commit more crimes. They commit more crimes. And yet people will defend those criminals more than the people trying to administer punishment. Because the whole idea of punishment is to try to correct a wrong behavior. And we don't see it in schools. We don't see it in the home. We don't see it anywhere. And society is becoming more and more lawless. And when you look at law, I mean, look at all the protests of people when Trump went into D.C. to try to clean up D.C. and make it safer. People were protesting that, saying that was a bad thing, that he was usurping authority, that he was a dictator, he was all this stuff. And he's just trying to make the streets safer for people who live there. And when you go talk to the people that live there, they appreciate that. You think the people of Chicago would appreciate that? You can't, at least at one point, I don't know if that's changed, I doubt it, but at one point, you could not even buy a gun in the city of Chicago. I think that's still the same. Within the city limits of Chicago, I do not believe there is a gun shop. And yet, every weekend, more people are being shot in Chicago than other places. And you can't even buy a gun in Chicago. And yet, city officials do nothing. Los Angeles, crime is rampant. Have you seen Figueroa? The corridor that goes from the Crypto Center now, what used to be Staples, down to the Coliseum, rampant with drugs, prostitution, homelessness. It's obscene the amount of focus on fighting and protesting people that just want to make the streets safe again. We'd rather have the criminal element running around than having a safe neighborhood for our kids, safe schools for our kids. We'd rather preach and indoctrinate ideology rather than teaching and educating their kids. We'd rather stick a phone or an iPad in their hands instead of talking with them and working with them and being interactive with them, because they're just a pawn in whatever it is that we're trying to do, whether it's our own self-narcissism. I want kids. Are you prepared for them? Probably not. But you're going to have them anyways. That's fine, because from what I tell, nobody is prepared to have kids when they actually come along. But people want them. But then they don't want to take care of them. They like the idea of it, but they actually don't want it. And so kids become a pawn. But when we look at it through the eyes of Jesus, unless you change and become like a little child, you'll never enter the kingdom of heaven. God valuing their humility, their trust, the dependence on him, rather than pride or self-reliance. In fact, there's a lot of lessons we can learn from what Jesus says and the Bible says about kids. Jesus welcomed children when others tried to keep them away. That shows that God's kingdom is open to everyone. It's not to be just for the people that sit in the first couple pews at church membership, but it's for everyone. The vulnerable, the powerless, not just the influential. He blessed children, laying hands on them. God delights in giving his blessings and his care to the least and the lowly. There's a verse that says, you do unto the least of these, you do unto me. The least of these could be children, teaching them, training them up, giving them discipline, so that when they do get older, they respect authority and don't wind up in prison, wasting their life away. He warned us against causing a child to stumble in Matthew 18. God takes seriously how we treat the weak. His kingdom protects the vulnerable. But that's protecting the vulnerable in the eyes of God, not in the eyes of us. And that also means training up in discipline. That also means in showing them what the Bible has to say about their life and who they are, making them responsible, making them people that are going to contribute to society, and all these other things. There's a lot of things in there, kind of hard to squash into a few minutes on this particular episode. But again, if we look at children through the eyes of Jesus, if we look at our lives through the eyes of Jesus and the messages that he has sent, it might be a game changer for us. We might want to discipline ourselves, get back into shape, stop wasting our money, stop going to places maybe we shouldn't go, stop consuming things, maybe get off social media, spend more time doing stuff that's more productive. He identified with children saying, whoever comes or whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. Serving and valuing children reflects on serving and valuing Christ himself. And that's probably the verse right there. That's the most important. When you value children, you value Christ. When you serve them, you serve Christ. He used children as an example of greatness. And we all know that true greatness in God's kingdom is not about power, but it's about humility and childlike faith. So there's a lot of references that we can take. We look at how the world treats kids. They're a pawn in everything we do. They're a pawn in our ideology. They're a pawn in our politics. They're a pawn in our money with abortion, LGBT ideology, indoctrination. Even with toys. And again, toys aren't bad. But again, they're just a pawn in trying to make money. In food, all the commercials for McDonald's and other places, obesity. And yet, how does Jesus look at them? Precious, vulnerable. They're powerless. They're dependent. They're trusting. They're humble. Those are some of the things that we can take and turn around and readjust our lives so that we become more dependent on him than ourselves. Because that's what it comes down to, being dependent on him and not ourselves. Well, how do we do that? I think our last podcast, we talked about the faiths of Hulk Hogan and Toby Keith. And I think Toby Keith summed it up pretty good right here.
John 3:16 is so simple. You don't go to church, you cuss, you do this, you drink wine, it's like, it doesn't say if you do all of these things and you pay this much money and you go to this church this many times, and that you go to heaven. It says, believe it. Whosoever believeth would not perish, but have everlasting. That's all it says. That's what it says. It doesn't say whoever believeth and does this laundry list over here. It says believe.
Talking about John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he sent his son, his only son, that whoever believes on him should not perish, but have everlasting life. Well, how do you believe? You got to accept the fact that he died on the cross, rose again. Behold, I stand at the door and knock, knocking on the door of your heart. If you open up, I'll come in. He's not going to impose upon your will. You're going to have to voluntarily do that and let him in and voluntarily believe. But if you want a place to check, Maybe you start with, okay, how close am I to believing this? Well, how close are you to treating kids the right way, protecting children, not making them a pawn in society, pushing back against the bill that would expose kids to unknown dangers? I mean, if you have a kid, you're always trying to protect them. If they're protecting them from running out in the street, from eating things that they shouldn't, from sticking their finger in a light socket, you kid-proof the house. You do all these things, right? At least with the first child. The third child, lucky they're alive by the time they grow up. But you do all these things to protect them. At what point are you going to change that and now expose them because of a political ideology? Because you hate somebody in the White House? Because you think a certain way, you're going to expose your kids or other people's kids to something that is very dangerous. I mean, it's bad enough that we've got the crime in the world and the people in the world that want to do bad things, including parents that do bad things to their own kids. But why do we want to expose other kids to things such as a bill that would allow anybody to walk in with a piece of paper and say, I'm taking the kid, give him over? And the school can't do anything about it, nor are they held liable for it. Maybe we should start looking at disciplining kids better so that they change their behavior, because discipline is good for us, makes us better people. It shows us the difference between our bad behavior and our good behavior. But yet we can't do that because then that is deemed wrong in the eyes of society. A society that's continually getting worse and worse and worse. And when people do something, they do step up. I'm going to clean up the streets of D.C. Everyone protests and takes the side of the bad guys, takes the side of the criminal element, takes the side of something. And what's even worse, there's a lot of people that I know in the church, they call themselves Christians. They call themselves, well, I don't know if they're Bible-believing Christians, but they call themselves Christians. They say they go to church, which this day and age doesn't really mean much anymore, unless it's the right church, the Bible-believing church. And then they'll turn around and they'll say, yes, abortion's fine. Or they'll say there's many ways to get to heaven. You can work your way into heaven. I can embezzle a little bit. I can do this. I can sin more so grace can abound. There's a lot of false teachings that are being preached from pulpits. And because it's in the name of God, people just accept it. They don't question it. Do your own research. Look it up. Especially when it comes to biblical things, look it up. Don't just rely on what I have to say. Do your own research. Look it up. Investigate. And I guarantee you one thing. If you investigate God, you're going to find him. This is Two Steps Ahead Podcast, encouraging you. Take your passion, make it happen. Let yourself be great. Check out our website, radiowarp.com. That's radio, W-A-R-P. Click on the show icon. All our past shows pop up. You can listen anywhere you listen to podcasts, Spotify, iHeartMedia, Pandora, everywhere. Do an internet search, TWO, Two Steps Ahead Podcast. We pop up. Hey Google, hey Siri, hey Alexa, play TWO, Two Steps Ahead Podcast. Our shows pop up. You can email the show, twostepsaheadpodcast@gmail.com. We're on all of social media. And again, if you have no place to go, reach out. If I can't help you, I'll find somebody that can, and together we'll walk that journey with you. Two Steps Ahead Podcast, encouraging you. Take your passion, make it happen. Let yourself be great. I'm Son Edom. Hey, thanks for listening. Do tell a friend. Until next time, God bless.